Hey, friendo, Steve here.
And Larson.
And on today's Going In Raw news brief, is WWE close to bringing back fans? And Rhea Ripley talks not being called up. But first, has there been a backstage power shift within WWE? Larson, what's in the news?
So following last night's Raw, PW Insider has an interesting report about the current state of WWE creative, saying, quote, current creative for WWE right now falls directly in the hands of Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard. In fact, there are some who have described Pritchard to PWInsider.com as the most powerful person in WWE right now other than a McMahon family member. Creatively.
I wonder if Conrad told him that.
Creatively, everything flows through Pritchard at the moment, and his word has been described as, quote, very much the gospel for Vince McMahon, which, as you might imagine, being in that position translates into a lot of frustration and heat towards Pritchard among talents privately. So among the segments on last night's show that drew some frustration was the opening segment, A Moment of Bliss, with Randall Keith Thornton, which PW
Special
Insider
guest star Randall Keith Thornton.
Yeah, sorry. Which PW Insider states was, quote, 100% Vince McMahon's vision. And the site also adds that, quote, several argued against the segment, feeling it was a weak opening segment and needed to be overhauled. So go back to June of this year. That's when WWE announced that Pritchard was spearheading the creative for both Raw and SmackDown. Pritchard was replacing Paul Heyman, who was relieved of his duties as executive director of Raw. And then in the August edition of Wrestling Observer newsletter, Meltzer reported that, quote, regarding the current creative situation, Bruce Pritchard's role isn't really driving creative, and Koski drives creative. Pritchard oversees the team, implements and executes Vince McMahon's orders, and makes sure other departments are notified about plans, so merchandising and network partners and promotional people are in the loop. Yeah. So it also talks about working a bit with USA and Fox. I mean, there's no reason that all these things can't be somewhat true.
Yeah, sure.
You know?
This smacks of what you've said often in the past, or we've discussed, that everybody has their own agenda, and a lot of the times when it gets filtered through the wrestling news sites, the dirt sheets, if you will, that can lend some perspective to some things, you know, maybe
especially things that seem maybe somewhat conflicting, you know.
Yeah.
That if there's someone who's a source for a particular outlet and they have an agenda they're trying to, you know, advance, that could lead to some conflicting reports potentially. I don't. This isn't the situation where we have sources telling us that. That's speculation on our part.
It's totally speculation, but I think that we're, you know, as much as we play clowns on TV, you know, it's not difficult to put, you know, to sort of look at the landscape, because that's what we do, man. We're not, we take all the bits of news that come out and we try to sort of put that puzzle together and sort of figure out, you know, what is more believable than others. And in this, it just seems like, you know, yeah, it's kind of obvious. Bruce and Vince McMahon, they're the final word on things. Bruce has been around for a very long time. I mean, look, I have enjoyed over the past couple of weeks. I think Raw and SmackDown have actually been pretty decent. It's decent enough for me to enjoy it. The Roman Reigns, I mean, that's where that's where I kind of take issue with some of this stuff. It could be that Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard are, Bruce Pritchard very much the gospel, as it says here. But I can't believe that Paul Heyman isn't spearheading the Roman Reigns stuff. I don't believe that these two guys are sitting down writing this stuff. It's just a bunch of people write it. It comes up, filters through these two guys.
Yeah, there's a process, yeah.
And they have the final word. I mean, that sounds logical. It seems like that's how it's going to be.
I mean, I think it was back when Pritchard got brought back into WWE. Jim Cornette, who I don't, always agree with, had an interesting take on his hire in that he said Pritchard isn't a yes man when it comes to Vince. He's the it man. He gets the it that Vince is looking for.
Yeah. He understands the language that Vince McMahon talks.
Which, Cornette, he worked in WWE Creative back when Pritchard was there. I would assume he has insight to their relationship, the situation at hand. So I have no reason to think that, he's fabricating something like that. That's obviously his take on the situation. But I would think, could be wrong, though, that is a take based on experience and some semblance of knowledge.
I just there are certain things like, okay, let's try to parse the stuff about the opening segment. I don't know, man. I get the feeling that Bray Wyatt has some amount of leeway with some of this stuff. I mean, we've heard other things like on SmackDown, Daniel Bryan has a hand in creative. Big E has said, hey, you know, the singles direction.
Well, Daniel Bryan is part of the creative team on SmackDown. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so Big E has said, you know, he was the guy. And now, I mean, look, Daniel Bryan sort of tangentially involved in the Intercontinental scene. I mean, not even tangential. That's where he's at. And look who looks to be next in line for the Intercontinental Championship, Big E. So it's kind of easy to put these things together. When Big E literally says Daniel Bryan's involved with this, and then you see that play out on TV, okay, Daniel Bryan seems to be involved with this. And all this stuff is very interesting because one thing that we love to hear about is the creative process, and they're very closed about the creative process.
Yes, very much so.
And it's more so than most industries. So that stuff, it is interesting. I mean, nothing about WWE right now. I mean, maybe sometimes with NXT when they're firing on all cylinders, but nothing about WWE TV right now smacks of like inspiration, like really inspired. The performers are great, and that's why a lot of this stuff is definitely watchable and entertaining. But it's funny whenever, you know, I was just listening to the Pritchard podcast 2 days ago. They're talking about Survivor Series 1995. Conrad's obsessed with WWE 1995. I love hearing about WWE 1995. It's a fascinating period. But whenever you listen to Bruce Pritchard talk on one of those podcasts about creative, him and Vince McMahon have a very simplistic view of WWE, of wrestling creative, what it should be. And it's very simple, and none of it is groundbreaking, and none of it's pushing the envelope, if you will. You know, nobody there is trying to make the next Mad Men. No. And one of the problems is right now, especially on TV and where you watch streaming devices on your TV, whether it's, you know, a feature length narrative or, you know, an extended series. I mean, the line between TV and movies, especially these days, are so blurred.
Yeah.
There's so much over the top quality stuff. I mean, the landscape right now with all these streaming services throwing literally billions of dollars into production of high quality, like auteur-based programming.
Yeah.
You got to try to compete with that. And that's one reason that's your competition. It ain't UFC, or, I mean, directly speaking, there are sports involved, you know, as competition. And I know they probably see that stuff.
As a weekly primetime entertainment program, your competition is what's on, well, first, I guess, network and cable television, but in a larger sense, streaming platforms like Netflix and Hulu and so on and so forth. Yeah.
You with a flick of a button, you're on Netflix, Hulu, or whatever, Amazon Prime, and another flick of the button, you're back on cable. You have to compete with so much stuff these days, and that stuff is killing it right now. And so the fact that they're not they still have that very simplistic sensibility. It keeps it entertaining enough for people who already like wrestling. It ain't bringing anybody in, because you're not generating any sort of buzz like they did back during the Attitude Era.
Competence is not going to be enough to manufacture some actual enthusiasm outside your core fan base. It's just not going to.
Yeah.
You know, you need the way you get eyeballs on the product is by going above and beyond competence.
You hire young. No other series that is innovative is going to be run by the same two 60 plus 70 plus year old guys for decades and decades. I mean, basically, I know Pritchard's come in and out, but you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, they had a guy like Jimmy Jacobs who was doing the last thing that was really super memorable. I mean, right now the Roman Reigns stuff is great.
It's really good,
you think of the Festival of Friendship and how those kinds of ideas, the Kevin Owens, Chris Jericho stuff, that's the kind of stuff where if you keep on developing that line of creative, that could start to break through. That could start to generate a buzz and start to grab at some of that younger demo that they really desperately need. So, I mean, you know, but the fact is they let Jimmy Jacobs go because he was apparently burnt out, and he took a picture with Bullet Club.
Wow.
So, you know what I mean? Like, they don't have that. And then when they hire people, you know, I mean, we still don't know what happened with our good friend Dave Schilling, but if you pay attention to his Twitter feed, you know, he's got a very sort of humorous, tongue-in-cheek take on what seemed to be probably a surreal experience.
Probably another aspect of it too is you're right about what's going on in the writer room, but also that also plays out on television where there's so much emphasis, like Survivor Series. It's one of the major 4 pay-per-views every year. You got the Raw versus SmackDown, the best tagline, but what were they using to market the whole thing? Undertaker. Over-reliance on stars that were established decades ago, and inability to build new stars. And we have a chance, we have talents there who have captured the wrestling zeitgeist. Specifically, I know AJ Styles and Finn Balor aren't exactly young talent, or either are Anderson and Gallows, but you have 4 dudes on the main roster used to be in Bullet Club, and you kind of dance around the idea of really doing anything substantial with them, but you never do. That's a massive missed opportunity because people, a younger demographic who are really into the Bullet Club stuff, if you get those 4 guys together, they're going to go crazy for it. If it's decent, if it's just decent.
Yeah. You have the 4 guys who are, I mean, I know there's, you know, you can say any number of people, Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, but you've got the 4 guys who basically built the thing that's in Hot Topic, the Bullet Club shirts, you know, a couple of years ago.
Hey, don't forget Tomatonga, man.
And thank you, Tomatonga, and Bad Luck Fele. But you have those 4 guys, and people love factions. It shocks me that it really shocks me that they never ran with that, you know, and you see how well factions can work and how cool they can be. You slap a cool logo on a t-shirt and you're making money right there. And it is so bizarre to me that they have not embraced that further. I don't know. It does and it doesn't, because again, they just like things to be simple, you know, they like things to be simple.
Yeah.
So I wonder, I am kind of curious, like who would have a problem? Who would have had a problem with the opening segment specifically from last night? Like, do you think that would have been other creatives that were like, hey, this might have been cooler?
I remember watching that segment and thinking this is pretty neat, but it did feel a tad undercooked.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah.
And if that's this, you know, if it's a situation where like, okay, let's do another revision of this particular segment and get it so it doesn't feel a tad undercooked. I mean, it could be as simple as that. Maybe it's a situation where it's like, maybe we don't have time to revise or rewrite the segment or add anything to it. So let's move it to another place in the show. So it's not opening the show. You know, they want the opening the show to be a pretty major hook to get people invested in the rest of the show. I don't know. Without more details, it's hard to speculate.
Yeah. Something that WWE continues to ruminate about. The return of fans. So obviously, Vince, we've heard this for ages now. He's been chomping at the bit to get fans back into venues for seemingly months now. About a month ago, WrestleVotes reported that WWE wanted fans in attendance at next year's Royal Rumble, even if it's just for that one show. We're 2 months away from that, Larson. Today, WrestleVotes had a bit of a follow-up, noting that internally, WWE is said to want a decision on whether fans are permitted for the Royal Rumble by January 7th, with a possible announcement of sorts coming that weekend. Source states odds are 50-50 right now. Important month ahead. We're in the catastrophic area of the pandemic. It's an interesting situation. I've been watching quite a bit of television about this stuff. How, you know, we really do need to be doubling down on efforts to make sure that these last couple months before the vaccine hits, the first responders, the healthcare workers, the people who are more at risk. I mean, you and I probably won't end up getting it till the summertime.
Yep.
But this last chunk of time, there is light at the end of the tunnel, but it's an ugly tunnel right now.
It is. And we still don't have any real hard data as far as how badly Thanksgiving travel is going to affect the numbers. That's still yet to It's probably going to be really bad.
It's probably going to be awful.
And, if people decide then, even in light of that evidence, to travel for Christmas, it's going to get really, really bad again.
The bigger issue is, again, we've mentioned this before. How will WWE justify this from a public relations standpoint if they do? If they go all out, let's say Vince is satisfied with an AEW type setup. I don't know. Do we even know where's the Rumble supposed to be happening?
They haven't announced, but one would assume it'd be
Tropicana,
at Thunderdome at Tropicana Field. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I don't know, man. If they set up something where you have some pods and you do their standard checks like AEW, if they basically replicate the AEW thing, hopefully that'd be enough to satisfy Vince. That's the best you can ask for. You're not going to have a bunch of people packed in on hard cam coughing in each other's mouths. That's not going to happen.
No. I mean, you look at some of the NFL games, there's 15, 25% attendance, or a lot of them. People are, I guess, relatively spread out. There's not pods per se in terms of individual seating units, but people are distanced.
Yeah.
And if you do that, enforce strict mask policy, that's really the best you could ask for at this point. Anything more than that is just a horrible idea. It's a horrible idea.
Yeah, it is. It'd be cool, man. The pandemic era of wrestling has been defined largely, especially in the earlier days, with cinematics. Why not they did such a great job with the Money in the Bank cinematic. I really loved that. Do the same kind of thing with the Royal Rumble. I think you mentioned this ages ago. Put it on a barge. Have some fun with
waters.
It.
That's right.
At Money in the Bank, you had two people be thrown off a roof, off a skyscraper. Luckily, Rey Mysterio and Aleister Black survived. Aleister Black, maybe he would have wished he hadn't at this point. In kayfabe.
I mean, they survived the fall. Aleister's career, maybe not so much.
Right, exactly. If in kayfabe he didn't, maybe he could have come back as a dead man. But yeah, do a cinematic. Have some fun with it. One last big cinematic to blow out, the pandemic, and the next thing you have is Mania, and maybe you can have some people there. So yeah. Hey, how about this? Once WrestleMania happens, you invite the healthcare workers, the people who have been vaccinated already. Say, hey, you guys done such a bang up job. Here, welcome to WrestleMania.
You get in free gratis.
Yeah. Somebody who wants in at WrestleMania once again, Rhea Ripley.
Good segue.
She talked about not being picked up in the WWE draft in an interview with Lillian Garcia on Chasing Glory. What did she say?
Yeah, so ever since eating the pin at TakeOver in Your House, kind of felt like Rhea Ripley was on the verge of getting called up basically to the main roster at any moment. And that was doubly so after she lost to Io Shirai in an NXT Women's title bout just a couple weeks ago. So as you mentioned, yeah, she had a pretty wide-ranging chat with Lillian Garcia and her podcast, Chasing Glory. There's some good stuff in there where Rhea talks about losing her confidence following her loss to Charlotte at WrestleMania this year, 36. But then she also talked about not getting drafted, and she almost makes it seem like that she was kind of expecting to get drafted. That's what she had to say, quote, "I was waiting for it, and then it didn't happen. I would like to go to Raw or SmackDown, but at the same time, there are so many people at NXT that I haven't faced yet, and I feel like there's so much more that I could still do. I'd love to wrestle Candice, especially now that her whole persona has changed. I'd love to wrestle Indy Hartwell, Shotzi. I want to wrestle Raquel Gonzalez again. I'd love to do a stipulation match with her. Those transcripts are from Fightful." I mean, just as someone who watches the product, it kind of feels like that Rhea has done everything.
Isn't that sort of, hasn't NXT sort of dug themselves into a bit of a hole after years and years and years of being the place where people go, they establish their brand, they get called up for better or worse. They're sort of in an interesting situation where they're finding out, they're learning how to, and in some cases very successfully, like Johnny Gargano, how to keep people around and keep them fresh, or even reabsorb people, Finn Balor.
Well, they got cases like Tommaso Ciampa where no idea what they're doing with him. It's the idea of you have someone in NXT for, let's call it a cycle, where they have their push, they have their major story arc. Maybe they win a championship or two, maybe not. So usually at the end of that cycle, that individual will get called up to the main roster.
Yeah.
But now it seems like NXT, now that especially it's on USA, I'm sure there's some minor ratings considerations. I don't think they really care about the ratings of that show. I'm talking about WWE as a whole, more so as a deterrent to AEW. Now we're getting to the point where more and more talents are staying beyond that first cycle, and they got to decide how to, as you mentioned, keep them relevant and fresh and involved, especially when a lot of those particular talents are pretty huge names within NXT. I mean, the fact they have not been able to come up with anything substantial for Tommaso Ciampa boggles my mind. My mind.
Yeah. It is interesting. There was a period of time when they were debuting on USA, it was a year ago when they had the Survivor Series stuff, when there really was a question how much of an actual third brand were they going to be. Mm-hmm. And they had, I think, a real opportunity there to switch things up in a way that felt real. And they didn't. They sort of reverted back. Now they're in an awkward in-between sort of state where, they're keeping the Undisputed Era there for probably way too long. Tommaso Ciampa, they've kept him there too long. And I know he has said in interviews, but I always take that with a grain of salt that he wants to stay in NXT. Well, that's fine as long as you have something to do. So yeah, I don't know. Rhea Ripley's going to end up on main roster, probably, I would think, sooner than later. If they're gonna have her stick around, find something meaty for her. I don't know. I mean, Gargano was the kind of guy who was such a pure babyface underdog guy that changing him was a drastic thing. Ciampa's done both. He's been like tweener babyface and he's been tweener bad guy. I mean, he's been really bad guy, but like even then, he was just really too cool to accept as like, oh wow, this guy's a bad guy.
Oh man, when his theme song was "Chorus of Booze," that was.
Yeah, I know, but that was still pretty cool. I get what you're saying though. He can only oscillate so far though,
Oh, I know.
Rhea Ripley, I kind of feel is in the same boat. I mean, maybe you can turn her back into like super mega heel. Maybe that'd work, and maybe you can get a lot more juice out of that. I mean, Shotzi obviously being set up as the next big babyface star. Mm-hmm. I mean, Rhea Ripley around as a big mega heel. Maybe they can have a cool, 2 or 3 takeover cycle thing like Ciampa and Gargano had. That's
maybe
a possibility and get a lot more out of
that.
that.
That's a situation too where, Rhea Ripley in NXT is not enhancement talent, but the point of that story, not to say Rhea wouldn't pick up some wins, but the end result of that story would be to get Shotzi over.
Yeah, sure. I mean, at some point, something's got to give and something's got to go. Yeah. At some point, Rhea Ripley's got to go.
Yeah, that's totally what it is we've been conditioned by NXT. It's like being a fan. I said it before. It's like being a fan of Major League Baseball team. You have to be a fan of the team, or in this case, the brand, because there's going to, historically speaking, be a lot of turnover. Yeah. NXT has also faced a lot of problems this year because they've had a lot of injury troubles.
Yeah, that's true, too.
Who knows what the plans would have been had Karrion Kross not gotten hurt. Even just more recently, if Finn Balor hadn't gotten hurt.
Yeah.
Keith Lee as NXT champion was called up quite suddenly.
Really suddenly.
Who knows if that changed any plans? So
yeah. I mean, with if you just sort of follow the model of the main roster, like you said, Rhea Ripley versus Shotzi Blackheart, eventually that's to get Shotzi Blackheart over. I get that. So you move Rhea Ripley onto another feud where she goes over, like 2 feuds, and then she goes back to putting a babyface over. It's just, but you're right. We've been conditioned to not think that's the way NXT works. But if they're going to keep people around indefinitely, they're going to have to start going to that more simplistic model of wrestling that we talked about earlier in the show.
Yeah.
Anyways.
And then it will feel like a third brand under WWE's umbrella.
Yeah, it's probably going to be headed there anyways. Put
it's
it in
the Catch-22.
Yeah, I know. It totally is. I mean, that's what NXT is. I mean, that's so great about it, is that it was so fresh. They just use people, and then basically at their zenith, they have them put somebody over, and then they quantum leap out.
Yeah, they teleport out. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a cool thing about that. Anyways, that's going to do it for this, what's turned into a news beef. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We appreciate it. Until next time, we'll talk to you later.
Goodbye.
Help support Going In Raw today by becoming a Friendo Club TV member. You'll get access to new bonus episodes every week, including Friendo Club Arcade, Live Power Rank, Vintage 10 for the Wins, and Ask Steven Larson. Get access to Friendo Club TV today by becoming a $5 and up patron at patreon.com/Steven Larson, by throwing us a sub at twitch.tv/Steven Larson, or by clicking join at youtube.com/Steven Larson.